Focusing is an orientation. Not only as a therapist am I oriented by my own focusing, my own in touchness with the emergence, but also I'm oriented as a therapist by everything I learn about change and emergence from the focusing process. And so that orientation helps me to situate myself in time and space in the therapeutic session and in the therapeutic relationship. So I'm oriented by focusing, and I'm also a relational therapist, meaning that I emphasize the importance and the value of relationality in many, many ways. And we'll talk about some of that tonight. So FORP is sort of relational in two ways. It's relational in focusing on one thing, and then also there is an orientation toward all the ways that we work with the relationship in a relational therapy.
When Lynn and I are talking about clinical practice or therapy or examples, we never disagree. There is nothing we disagree about. Then as soon as she states her point of view in abstract terms, then I get all upset. So first I have to explain that. Okay. Back in 1954, I think it was. No, 52. So that's what? That's more than half a century ago. I joined a group of therapists. I was a philosophy student, but they said, yeah, that's interesting to have a philosopher. So I joined them, and I was in the practicum, and it was just a time when research findings were coming in. Research findings from a 3-year project, big thing. And Carl Rogers had predicted that the relationship would make a difference. The relationship would affect the outcome. We had a whole bunch of I just joined then. I was a green student. A bunch of outcome measures, all different kinds. And the research showed definitively that the relationship made no difference. So that was a great disappointment. But I do want to say, in my experience, somebody way back then tried to say that the relating is basic to what's going on in therapy. And I thought that too, but the research said no. So I went looking to see how had they measured this relational thing. Well, they measured it by classifying all the statements. And so there were statements talking about us or the therapist, and they were classified relationship. And then there were statements about oneself and one's inner experience and all that, and they were classified not relationship. And how much relating there was going on made absolutely no difference. Well, I was in therapy at the time, and for me, that made perfect sense. I never talked about my therapist. I was much too shy to ever do that. Everybody called him by his first name, but I didn't. And I didn't call him anything else either. I just didn't. So I knew that when I walked in the door, before I walked across the room and sat down there, when I walked in the door, I was different. And that happened completely regularly. And so I thought, well, what I really want is I want to be like that when I'm not here, you know. So I said to myself, that's the relationship. And the statements aren't going to tell you anything about it. So from then on, for the next 20 years or so, I fought this battle in favor of relationships. Because at the time, and not many of you are old enough to remember that time, it was a time when psychology consisted entirely of individual differences. That's all they were interested in. Everything was individual, Everything was individual differences. Everything came out of the individual. If you had any relational stuff, it was projection. It was transference. And your doctor, if you said to your analyst, Dr. Morrison, I love you, or Dr. Morrison, I'm mad at you, or anything like that, Dr. Morrison would say, that can't be. You don't really feel about me. It has to be your father or somebody else in your past. That was all that was permitted. And I had one client I had being a trainee who absolutely was driven crazy by that, because she loved Dr. Morrison, and she knew that she loved Dr. Morrison. She had never met anybody like that before, and Dr. Morrison could not stand it. So, again, in my own experience as a client, I knew that it's always both. It's always what's going on now, and the past is in there. If the past hadn't been the way it was, this wouldn't be going on this way now. The past is always there, and the present is always there too. But that's not how people understood it. And even when I went to make focusing instructions, which was revolutionary, and part of the courage it took to do that was a group of students that I worked with. When that research came out and it showed, first there was research to show that it doesn't change over therapy. Then we were very disappointed, because we thought that over the course of therapy, people would do more and more inner touch making. At the time, we called it PFC, PCF, preconceptual feelings. We thought were very important. Well, that didn't increase over therapy. Instead, you could predict from the first 2 interviews whether it was going to succeed or fail. Well, that was horrible, because that means people get together for 2 years and all this loving and care and effort and money and everything else, and you could predict from the beginning that it wouldn't do any good. So I went and did focusing instructions to get people to have preconceptual feelings. And then when that result came out, then people said, oh, this is for those people for whom it's indicated. The people who are already going to be successful with that kind of thing, those are the ones who should have this kind of therapy, and other people shouldn't. Because everything was individual differences. There were only individuals. There were no relationships. And then one day, and I don't know that I marked the day exactly, it all flipped over, and the pendulum went to the other side, and now we have only relationships. Now everybody's talking about dialogue and interaction, and there aren't any more individuals, there are only relationships. So you think I'm happy? I'm just as unhappy as I was before. And meanwhile, being a philosopher, I know where that comes from. That doesn't come from psychology or psychotherapy. It comes from postmodernism. They eliminated the subject, the human individual. And that was a good revolution to have if you accept that revolutions are like that. They turn everything upside down, and so nothing really changes. It's just upside down. So they were still thinking about everything the same way, but now they were rejecting the individual. And so in the postmodern philosophy for the last 25, 30 years, there aren't supposed to be any individuals. That gets rid of a lot of junk about how the individual is the source of everything and there aren't any relationships. But it puts in a lot of junk, because now there are only relationships, there aren't any individuals. Now if you say somebody, philosophers are very peculiar. This happens in philosophy all the time. Back in 17-something, they got rid of matter. And the famous Samuel Johnson misunderstood this, and he kicked a stone and he said, there, I disproved the bishop's theory that there is no matter. He didn't understand that the Bishop Berkeley, was changing the concept of matter, not matter. The same thing happens with the unconscious. People who see that the unconscious is a little homunculus, a little person underneath the person who knows everything you don't know, that's a stupid theory. So they say there is no unconscious. Well, that's silly. There is what they're pointing to with the word unconscious. But that concept isn't right. Do you follow me? And that goes on all the time. So now there aren't any individuals, but of course that isn't meant in the simple way that the man who kicked the stone took it. It's not meant to deny that you're sitting here and I'm sitting here. But it is a way of misunderstanding everything just the way it was before, only upside down. So now the individual would be some content that comes out, the source of all the content. Well, it's clear that that's not right. The source of all the content is clearly everything together, the culture and the interaction and the other people and you and everything else. So, yeah, we got rid of some bad stuff, and we also have some more bad stuff. So when Lynn sticks the R into FOT, there are two things that bother me about it. And as long as you know those, I'll be okay. One of them is the implication that, the old implication, that now there's only R. Now you can't have F anymore because there isn't any such thing. There's only relating. The postmodern people have it so that what happens in my therapy with you is a product of the stuff that you say and the stuff that I say. And I deny it. I say, no, I'm not a product. I'm not a product of what you say, and I'm not a product of what I say either, surely. It's a misunderstanding of what a person is to think of a person as content. The same misunderstanding that I was fighting in 1952 or 4, whenever it was. You can't measure the relationship by classifying the sentences, whether they're about the relationship or whether they're about the self, doesn't tell you anything. Why not? Well, because the living process is not what we say. The living process is not content. The living process isn't even what we do either. The living process is always implicit. And you see where we start to agree, Lynn and I. It's an implicit, living is implicit. And then what you do and say from it, well, that varies. So you think if I get up and walk out now, that's all there is to me is getting up and walking out? You wouldn't think that. Well, neither is what I'm saying all there is to me or all there is to you. So if I talk about the relationship, that's swell. But if I'm too shy to talk about the relationship, there's no relationship. Conversely, okay, so one thing that bothers me is the current cant, the current language bothers me just as much as the old language. We have to be able to think of living as a richer, much more intricate, much more complicated, implicit ongoing from which we speak. So right now I'm filling you up with my words, but surely you're sitting there, you're not just my words, you still know who you are and where you're going and many things that are more important than my words. And so, simply said, one thing that bothers me is the current language. So when Lynn and I talk about therapy, then the current language doesn't bother me. But as soon as she seriously makes statements in the current language, then I say, no, wait, that sounds like those people that don't agree with you. You know, those people that think there are no people. Well, Lynn would never think there were no people. But when you say it that way, okay, the second thing that bothers me, perhaps even more, is that for people who don't know focusing-oriented therapy, it sounds like focusing-oriented therapy is intrapsychic, is all about going in. Well, we know that we can't make it on that. One would imagine from this kind of talk Not that any focusing therapist would ever do that, but you can imagine from the kind of talk that focusing-oriented therapy is not relational, which is absurd. Then it would be, what, just two people sitting in silence for an hour or 50 minutes? Or what? It would be a therapist saying, go focus and leave me alone, or something like that. I don't want to be bothered, you do it in there. It's an absurdity to think of focusing-oriented therapy as the opposite of relational therapy. Now, it also makes relational therapy quite empty. I'm not interested in the kind of therapy that, if I took the current people literally, there would be these two half shells that are somehow or other generating some content between them that amounts to two people, something like that. So now I've told you what I'm against, right? Good. Okay. Now, where I want to go from here is to say methods and theories. And that's not the same thing, certainly. Methods tell us what to do as therapists, and theories tell us why it works, or supposedly why it works. Methods and theories, I say, are all helpful, and we should learn from all of them. But they're desperately mistaken if you choose one of them. And currently, that's still the style. We teach all these methods to the students, and then we expect them to go out and shape people's heads in just triangles or trapezoids. They're supposed to choose one method. So I'm saying, no, don't choose one method. Know all the methods. Each method can sensitize you to very important things. If you know the method, don't do it, but you know it. So then, when that kind of thing comes up, you have a repertoire of things to do. So methods are good for repertoires of things to do. And I love every method that I ever learned, and I would like to learn some more of them. And in that spirit, I am learning some things from the relational people, because it gives me more things I can do when I'm stuck, and it also encourages me to do that kind of thing more. And so here's the positive of it. Especially those of us in the focusing-oriented, I forgot to say that focusing-oriented therapy is a clumsy title, isn't it? But I fought for it, because at the time that book came out and we started to have a kind of therapy, the Germans were years ahead of us. They already had focusing therapy everywhere. Focusing therapy was all over. And I couldn't stand focusing therapy. What would it be? So we've battled for a year or so, and we settled finally on focusing-oriented therapy, which may not mean anything to other people, but to me at least, it means that you do anything and everything that was ever helpful for anybody, but you do it in a focusing mode. That means you are in touch with focusing levels in you, and you invite help the client to get in touch with deeper levels of them. Yes? Okay. So my second point wants to be, in therapy, as a therapist, don't do a method. If you do a method, my burlesque of this is that you're really saying, I am a Gestalt or whatever therapist. I'm a focusing therapist. I'm a whatever, relational therapist. If you come to me, you're going to do Gestalt, okay? If you don't like it, go to somebody else. That's not an attitude to have towards a human being who is sitting there. So completely the opposite. When I get ready to see somebody, and I may be in all kinds of bad mood and upset and troubled and whatever, but in 5 minutes my client will come. I get ready for that. And that means another human being will be sitting there. And then I become the chair, the person in the chair. This is a very big chair, and I'm a very small person. But I know how to be in the chair. So then I take all my own stuff that's been bothering me and I put it here, and I take all the methods that I know and I put them there, and I am armed, right? I know a lot of methods, I know a lot of things I could do, so I won't be stuck, don't worry, but here's my armament, and then I'm open. And then somebody is sitting there, and I'm open, I'm waiting for them. They're somebody. And they live in a world that's skewed to mine. It's different. And so I'm waiting. And what am I doing when I'm waiting? Am I relating or am I focusing? Right? Just like I, as a client, when I walked in the room and I was already different, was I relating or was I focusing? Don't divide that. That doesn't make any sense. So then I am relating directly. Now, my client may or may not be able to relate directly, may or may not be able to look at me even. May be like I was as a client, too shy to do any kind of overt thing. But that doesn't matter. I'm here, and I know there's somebody in there. Now, currently they're trying to tell me there's nobody in there. There's only whatever you're going to do and whatever they're going to do. That's not true. I know there's somebody in there. And I know there's somebody way in there, even if it may take a long time for that person to get in touch with those levels inside. And until they do, we aren't really going to know a whole lot. Would you grant? I mean, this person's going to tell me their world, and that's a lot, and I have to learn it. But in terms of what's really wrong, we're not going to hear from because what's really wrong is always around the corner and then again around the corner and then down a little and then around that corner. And unless you go those steps, you don't really know. Because each person is this unique world that's beyond the common world, which is what I'm saying these days about Barreau, that language makes you think as if the language says what the language wants to say, the common phrases that everybody knows. And you have to use those, you think, and then you just hope that the phrases will accidentally, indirectly sort of say what you want to say. You don't have to do that. You can go past there and go directly to where you're alive and speak from there. But it's some trick to do. And some people will come to therapy and they already know how to do that, but some don't. So I am relating to the person in there from the start. And what do I do? Well, whatever I think is helpful. So routinely, while I don't know anything, I want to respond mostly reflectively so that this person has the experience of being seen. And since nobody does that, if I do it well and if I'm lucky, the person will go home even after the first interview and say, huh, they may not have any words for it, but there will be some kind of implicit effect. And I want that all the time. But then again, I may not only reflect, because only reflect is making a method out of listening. You see, I'm client-centered. You come here, you're going to get back whatever you say. That's all I do. If you don't like it, go somewhere else. No, that's not listening. Listening is listening for the person in there. And so when something comes from there that says, I don't know, something that may move me to say something quite unusual or quite listening unreflectively. And then I also know that when I say those things from me, and like I thought yesterday, if I'm going to demonstrate with somebody, you'll see this right away. Because the first thing I do when I demonstrate with somebody in front of a big group is I relate to them in terms of trying to make them comfortable. So I say, well, which maybe I don't get to do if we don't have time, but I say, well, I'm going to ignore them now, and various other things like that. And I say, you don't have to say everything. What comes in you, keep it for yourself and say only the part that you want. And right away you see a person go, easing there when they come all tense to demonstrate with me. So what am I doing there? I'm not reflecting, right? I'm not stating back what they said. I'm saying me and where I am and letting the person get a feel of me and where I am. And then if what I said was wrong, then I find for years now, almost all the years I've practiced, I find that doing something wrong, if you can catch it, if you know it was wrong, it's better than if you hadn't done it, because you go to try to fix it. And first you fix it by understanding it. Oh, I see. To you that meant da-da-da-da-da-da. Well, I didn't know that, but I see now. Oh, yeah. And then I may even fix it further and go further steps with it, so that I am no longer, well, I don't know that I ever was, worried about doing the wrong thing. But I do have a hangover from client-centered therapy of being still relatively shy. Like I'll let a silence go for a long time, but then again I don't, so that's not right either. I don't let a silence go for a long time. I want to be clear in the silence that we are connected. So if we're silent and the person is clearly moving inside, oh, then I'm satisfied. But if the person's looking around for sort of help me, I'm stuck, I'm not going to leave them there, right? Whatever I say, it doesn't go any further, or are you stuck, or was that bad what we did, or something or other. And then whatever I say is bound to be wrong. I'm not interested in saying something right. I'm interested in getting something right from the person. So this is my chief point, really. There is a person there, and if you will listen, you can tell that what comes from the person back at whatever you said that's them. And what you said was just an invitation to them, or reaching for them, or looking for them, or whatever it is. Anything I ever say is like that. Then when I hear back, oh, well, then I know better, right? Then I've heard from them. So I'm denying that there is no person there, and that what we're doing or being is some kind of co-created product of the two of us. I'm saying, yeah, it takes the two of us. It takes me to say something so that something will come back. But that what comes back lets me know where we are. Now, suppose I say something new that wasn't part of what my client had thought, and I teach all my clients indirectly by, if I say something and then they're sort of saying, well, that isn't quite right, and then again you see why it isn't quite right is because I just wave that away. I say, never mind, don't get stuck with what I said. What should be said? And so after a while, my clients do this too. I start to say something that's not right, and they go. Because they know that I'm not interested in what I'm saying. I'm interested in what is actually there. On the other hand, when I say something surprising and different than they had, but it's right, and my client says, oh, yeah, da-da-da-da-da-da, right? Then what I said becomes their own. Then often, with relief, I will say, oh, well, if it's right, I'll say it again, and I do. Because if it's right, then we want to stay there for a minute, not run onto something else. So my point is that even if I contribute the content, even if I contribute the interpretation, the content, or whatever you want to call it, when it's right, it becomes my client's own. And if it doesn't do that, then it doesn't take. So then it was just an invitation. Then I say, well, what would be right? Go see. And then if they can go see, they do that. They go see. And if go see doesn't mean anything to them, well, then we go on some other way. And there the R is very welcome in FOT, because the more things that we can do when somebody is not able to go in like that, the better. Because every time we do something, then we can point to where they were in touch with themselves. So focusing is a broad thing, and instructing people to focus is a very narrow thing. And mostly in therapy, I don't do it. I don't instruct people to focus. I invite them. I say, what comes here when you say that? And that to me is a huge, wonderful thing that works with half the people, and I recommend it highly to you, whatever your orientation is. If you wish your patient would go in and be more in touch, just say, what comes to you here as you say that? And then half the people will go right down, including very upset people and inner city children and all kinds of nonverbal people. They will go right here and be surprised that you care about it, if it's the first time you've said that. But they will go right there, and your whole therapy will deepen immediately. The other half of a typical patient load will say, what? And so you say, never mind, because it doesn't mean anything to them to say what comes to you here, you know. But you can get away with it once. I mean, if you start to push it, don't. That's not therapy. Then you're not responding to this person here. Now that we have that technology, the point I want to emphasize is that what takes in the relating, what comes back from the person, is that person's own, not something that I brought in, even though originally I brought it in, maybe. Because there is somebody in there, and what I'm really interested in from start to finish is that person in there. I'm working for that person. And so it can't be that my method is limited to people who can do that. Nowadays, a lot of clients come to me and they know about me and focusing, so they think they have to focus. And oh my God, what if I can't focus? And so then I laugh and I say, oh no, I'll show you that by and by. But there's a million other things we can do other than focus, for God's sakes, right? So that's where I get sore when people contrast the going in silence with the interaction, because all of focusing is interaction. And when I'm alone focusing by myself, then I am relating to myself. And unfortunately, the relationship that I have to myself isn't always that good. And partly I'm still relating to my parents and all kinds of things, but I'm focusing as a human being, and a human being is always relational. It's always relating. And when you're alone relating to yourself, you're double relating, because you're relating to yourself and you're also in a relational climate. That's why the focusing attitudes are important, if you can manage them from the book. But really, you need a partner. And with a partner, focusing always goes deeper. And I always brag about my research project of 1,000 runs on the same subject, because I got deeply involved in research for many, many years. So I think it's very dramatic to say, I have a research project in which I ran the same subject 1,000 times. Can you imagine a subject standing still for that? Nobody has a research like that, but I do. I have the same subject on the same day, in the same climate, with the same diet, with everything controlled. It's an ideal research. And that's me, of course, focusing by myself and then focusing with my partner. And there is a huge difference. And it's perfectly true that with this partner, certain things can come, and with that partner, other things come, not those things. but they're both of them mine. They come out of me. And it's true that the way my partner is makes the difference. But they're both of them my response. They're not the way I interpret the words co-created. But they certainly come because of the co. Okay, there I'll stop.
Now I'm going to share with you a little bit about the relational emphasis that we've been developing. This is a continuum, and I want to assure Gene, this is not a philosophical or theoretical continuum. It's a continuum of therapist responsiveness. And it is a continuum of I have here a keyboard because one of the people, Monica, in our Monday morning group said, well, it's like a piano keyboard. We're playing all of the notes, and I just love that. So if we picture this as a kind of piano and the therapy relationship as going all over this, this keyboard and following the melody, both of the people, as Gene says, both people are trying to make a relationship for the one in there, for the one deep down. And we do that on this side through carefully reflecting what the client is saying, encouraging the client to pause, to find something here, as Gene says. The silence is important. The attitude of receptivity and of quiet is very important in these moments. And on this side and this side are all equally relational, but they look different. This side, the therapist and the client, are actively talking to each other. They're playing with each other. I would never say they're co-creating. But let's say they're playing together, and they're expressing themselves together. This side is an expression of the two people together, engaged with each other, and this side, this moment, is a moment of the client finding her own experience in that moment. Now, of course, this side is also the client's own experience. And this side also, of course, both people are deeply involved with each other. But the keyboard has a different flavor and different activities. All of these activities are meant to bring out and develop the client, as well as, I would say, as well as the dyad, as well as the pair, as well as making a new kind of relationship. And the new kind of relationship fosters a new kind of being, so that when Gene felt in the presence of his therapist a new self, it was a new kind of relatedness that made a new sense of self. And so this whole keyboard is trying to find a new relatedness that makes a new sense of self. Now, in the middle of the continuum, I have asking into poetizing. This side here, the middle of the keyboard, the therapist is actively involved with her or his own felt sense and finding the right kind of images and words that will invite what's there. The therapist, it's not good enough, and Gene will agree with me here, it's not good enough to try to help the client to make a better relationship with themselves. It's not good enough to say, can you find compassion for that there? the person is having a lot of trouble finding compassion for that there. What's helpful is for the therapist to find compassion, and then as the therapist is interested in accepting, welcoming of that in there, that deep one inside, then of course that makes a relational togetherness that has a receptivity to that. So in the middle here, the therapist is making a relationship, inviting, welcoming, invoking, inviting that one inside with her own words, felt sense, images, and metaphors. And on this side of the keyboard, the therapist and the client are in conversation, in play. I'm going to give you just a tiny little example. There was an example of Lois Greifer from our Thursday group, and I don't think she's here today. No, she's not here. She gave an example of improvisation in which her client was saying, "Oh, I'm so timid. I'm such a wimp. I can't even drive in New Jersey traffic. I can't even find my way. I just don't know. I just can't be an adult here. Every adult can drive a car in New Jersey." And so the therapist, all of you are focusing people are very familiar with this problem of what we've called the critic. The therapist said to her, "Yes, I see what you mean, but where are all these people?" So the client looks up and says, "Well, they're not sitting in this chair." And so then the therapist laughs and said, "Well, they're not sitting in this chair." And so there's a whole different feeling in that playfulness, and the session proceeds from a very, very different place. That's what I'm calling improvisation. The improvisation isn't necessarily, sometimes it can be a drama, sometimes it can be a sand play, sometimes it can be role play, it could be anything, but it doesn't have to be. It can be simply finding a way of being engaged with it from a different place. And so there's a kind of new living further that is happening through this whole keyboard. But we're doing the living further on this side by engaging together in a different way than is possible to come from the client alone. The therapist is introducing something. The therapist is wanting to know what kind of interaction is this one down here, this inner self. What kind of interaction is needed? And there are all kinds of interactions that are needed by people, all kinds of relational experience that's needed. Sometimes it's needed to have a witness. Sometimes it's needed to have a playmate. Sometimes it's needed to have the feeling of someone that's bigger than me that can take care of me. Sometimes it's needed to have the feeling of a likeness. Sometimes it's needed to feel deeply appreciated by the other. Sometimes it's needed just to be silly together. There are many kinds of interactions that this one down here is calling for, that the therapist is sensitive to and wanting to be able to be free to go all over this keyboard.
I want to first say that what Lynn is teaching here is good stuff. And if you don't know it, learn it. Then I want to disagree with it, right? I don't disagree with it as stuff that we, coming from listening, tend not to know how to do very well.
Which is the stuff that coming from listening, you don't know how to do very well, just to
Those
clarify
lovely
for
things that you
people?
just laid out.
playing,
playing
engaging,
and engaging in a certain way, and
finding inviting a conversation that's touching
yes,
and gripping and meaningful.
any of those things. You want those in your repertoire so that when you are there sort of open without applying a method, they will come to you. And then the other thing is that you don't, in my opinion, you don't have to reduce your concept of psychology just to that. That's what theories tend to do. They want to sell you, and methods too. They want to sell you on the fact that therapy works just for this reason, just because of this thing, and just do this thing, and then you're doing therapy. And so the percentage of success is roughly the same all the way across all the wildly different things. Doesn't matter if you do guided imagery or if you do role play or if you do whatever you do, because so many of these methods are done just as methods. This is what I do. I don't take Lynn to mean it that way. Okay, so then I don't disagree. Where I disagree is on the keyboard notion. I want to say you can only play part of the keyboard at a time. I think to think is an orchestra. You can't explain an orchestra, right? The reason people go to hear an orchestra is because even the tape is not anything like what it sounds like when you're surrounded by the sound of the orchestra. That's really the main difference I have. But then it gets down into the detail. So Lynn said that when I walked in the room and I was already different, that was a new self. I'm saying, no, that was me. Now, it was very new to me because when I was, I don't know what, 3 days old already, part of me got very discouraged, and it didn't ever recover. But that's the point I'm trying to make, is no, that's not a new self. That was me. And
Can I, do you want me to respond to that, Gene?
yeah, if I could just sum it up somehow. It's the or when somebody is focusing and they arrive somewhere, I will say, oh, so is that relational or is that focusing? It used to be that we tried not to react to the content because it was like saying, well, when you get this kind of a thing, then we approve, and therefore you better get this kind of thing all the time. Now I'm through with that. I like to show my response to everything that goes on. So when the silence is too long, I may cough or move around noisily in my chair because I don't want to be lost track of. I want to be there. So to me, the person focusing, even silently, is just as relational as it is when we play and we hope that the focusing, that the person reaches inside themselves more. So for me, that comes from the inside. Yes, it's your turn.
I like your idea of the orchestra. Of course, there are many instruments and many dimensions. And of course, you know, Gene, that I'm not talking about a method. You know that.
No, that's why I said
I'm
right from the
talking
start.
about, I am talking about skills, though.
Yeah.
I have a new
Yeah.
idea
Yes, that's
that
good.
along in contemporary psychoanalysis, we've decided that technique is out, because technique is sort of a one-size-fits-all. It used to be thought that if you had the right interpretation, the right technique, that then that's what was needed. And in a new sensibility in psychoanalysis, there's many different papers and discussions about how we don't believe in technique. But then that leaves young clinicians learning all of these theories, sitting down with difficult patients in clinics, saying, what do I do? What do I do? And being completely at sea. My idea is that every theory has a something to do that's implied by the theory. And the something to do I call skills. And skills are different than techniques because you have a repertoire of skills like a musician does. But then when the musician is improvising, all of those skills, all that knowledge of scales and knowledge of the instrument is all in there. But the musician isn't necessarily thinking about all of those things. So that's what I'm calling skills.
Right.
It's very important to have skills, and this continuum gives just a little sort of sketch of the kinds of skills that we want therapists to develop. The skills of helping people to find themselves inside in simple ways, like how is that here? And the skills of asking into something. What is that like when you say that to me? What was that just happened now between us? That kind of question. Or, oh, that sounds like the thing that you were saying the other week about blah, blah, blah. Or it's a such and such kind of feeling. And then waiting to see if that does something. Or the skills of back and forth talking about what I call talking about the you and me of the relationship, which is a very, very important thing to be able to do and very, very difficult to do in our culture, very rare to do. So it's very rare to be listened to the way client-centered people listen and Gene listens. And it's also very rare to have the kind of intimate exchange where you can talk with another person about your deep longings having to do with them, your disappointments with them, your wishes for them, to try out new behaviors with them, to fight with them when you've never fought before, to relax with them when you've never relaxed before, to talk about how meaningful that last thing was, whatever it is that happened between you. When Gene was so shy in the beginning in therapy, we would want a therapist that would be aware of his shyness and be very tender with that shyness.
Be
But
very what?
tender with the shyness. And also want maybe to bring out a little bit more, to find a little more freedom there. I also want to say that I agree that it isn't a new, it's not that a new us makes a new me, but there's, as I develop, there's the sense of new experience and new living, and there's every moment a new kind of me. But of course, that me is all me. But the feeling of a new me, such an important feeling, the feeling of being reborn in this moment, the feeling of something new in me just coming to life, and how that happens. Gene, want to say something, or shall we ask them?
Well, I don't have much to say that I haven't already said. I wouldn't like my therapist to have decided what I needed, which is one of the dangers in theories and methods. But other than that, I would agree that it would have been nice if he could have done that. Then he probably would have seen me shrink down into my chair and he wouldn't have done it again. But I would say, from my point of view, it would be good for him to know how to do that. He didn't know how to do that. But then again, he was extremely relational because he was always like this, you know, trying to hear and whatnot. The difference that I'm looking for is to have, what I mean by the orchestra is to have the relation, the relating and the method, any other method, together. You wouldn't want somebody to relate to you not from deep down inside on Tuesdays and then to sit there silently and not feel you while they're going inside themselves on Wednesdays, if you see what I mean. Or in the first half of the hour, in the second half of the hour. Because you would be just as much there every moment with them while they're silent. And if not, then do something. Make a noise at least. Don't let them sink over there in autism, because now we're focusing. And then later relate from yourself, all right, but don't not need them to go inside to get the depth of what's going on, because now we're relating. And you don't mean it that way. When you say we're playing, you include the fact that you would like your person to sense themselves playing, and not just playing with you, but sense themselves playing. And that's as much as you're telling us. That, oh,
Right.
this might be something, it's a new way, or at least a fresh way, that they can feel themselves.
Let me
So the difference and the sameness should be relatively clear, but let's open up. Yeah.
Okay, let me say just a couple of things there. One thing is that that whatever we're doing on this keyboard, we want to be checking, and we learn that from focusing. And so it's wonderful. I don't know if Lois, with her improvisation, said, "How is it now to the room seems different?" That would, I don't know if she said that, but that would be the kind of thing that we know to do, to say, what happened there, or how is that now, or some way of the finding the place from, and what's changed and what's needed from there. So that checking is always an important kind of thing, although you may wait until after the whole play is sort of has its own form before you do that. The other thing I just wanted to say is when you said you don't want the therapist to decide what you need, there's a principle that we have in focusing about putting something out or living something and being so sensitive to, is it needed? I'm doing this, but I know that this isn't going to be the specificity of the implicit intricacy. But I'm saying, oh, I think this is needed, and I make that movement. And then, as Gene said years ago, and I always remembered this, a sensitive therapist isn't one that knows. A sensitive therapist is one that pays very, very close attention to the next thing that happens, not only verbally, but non-verbally, after the therapist is doing something, being something, attending to something. And so that's a very, very important principle. And I don't see these as two separate methods at all, but as one whole way of making a relationship with this one deep inside.